Welcome to part 2 of the DIY bass kit series that's available over at newperspectivesmusic.com. If you don't know what I'm doing, I make these CNC downloadable files that you can use to create your own instrument. I did it with a guitar a while back. It went really well, so I'm doing it with the bass now. Besides the CNC files, you can also download physical templates, and so in this video series I'm making these basses. There's one, the other one's back there, using one with the physical templates and one with the CNC files. So in part 2 we're going to make the necks both ways, one on the CNC and then one by hand. We're going to at least get started because it's a big process, and there's going to be a second video that goes into some more depth of that. But what I wanted to point out at the top is that, you know, making a neck is hard and time consuming and maybe a little bit intimidating. So the cool thing about this kit is that you don't have to make the neck. You could actually buy a Fender style J or P neck as long as it's a 34-inch scale neck, and it's going to bolt right on and work perfectly. So you could start by making your own body and doing all that stuff, and then maybe in the future try tackling the neck. But if you want to jump into the neck right away, let's just do it. Let's start by looking at the CNC file, and you'll remember from part 1 that what I did is I tricked the software into doing all 2D cutting and carving, so you don't need expensive 3D Aspire software to do this. You can use any version of VCarve 9.5 or newer. And you see here what I did is I created molding tool paths, and I did 2 of them, one for each side of the neck, and that way I can get this radius on the neck, but it does create this little point sort of in the middle that I am going to have to take off by hand, but you'll see it's actually not as bad as it looks on the computer. And to kind of prove the feasibility of this, instead of doing one of my reclaimed glue up things, I just literally went to the box store and bought this 6 by 3 foot piece of maple. It costs about $35. I actually bought a 6 foot piece and made 2 necks, so it cost about $70 for the whole board. And this is just 3/4 inch 6 by, material. Worked great, and so you don't have to go into all this like crazy, wood hunting or gluing and stuff. Just an old maple board will work. And of course, we start by strapping on my CNC. Now, with the CNC files for this, you want to do the top side first. You can see there's a truss rod slot to cut out, and as well as some reinforcement slots, and I reduced the height of the head a little bit. So we do all this, and then we do our tricky little guide index thing to flip it over. I have a bunch of holes that I drilled randomly into the top of the block of wood there, and then I go and drill the mirror of those holes into my wasteboard. You can see I marked them with a marker so I can find them. I have a lot of holes on there right now. And just use little pieces of pencil to align that on the CNC. So now I know when I flip my board upside down, I have it aligned properly and everything should cut and both sides should match. Now, one thing to note, the way I ended up designing these profile or molding cuts on the back, it actually starts at the deep end. So that very first pass, your end mill, and you can use a 1/4 inch ball nose end mill, has to plunge almost all the way through the board to make that first cut, and then work its way up to the top. And so just run it slow, especially for that first pass, and just make sure everything's bolted down good. And it was fine, but it is just a little scary, that first cut, and then every incremental cut it's only cutting a little bit of the wood, so it's fine. So I did all that, the fluting or molding toolpath first, and then I also created these little fluting toolpaths up by the headstock, you'll see, to just remove some of that material and kind of start to shape out that transition where the flat headstock meets the curved neck. Cut it all out, and there you go. Now we have a neck pretty close to done. That came out way better than I expected. There's a lot less handwork that needs to be done than I thought there was going to be. So this is hot off the presses. I'm real excited about this. I thought I was going to have to tweak these files a little more in order to do all this sort of 3-dimensional stuff using this 2D software, but this is really good. So now I'm going to try the fingerboard next, which I think we're going to be able to do on the CNC and get this close again, pretty close to what we want using all this old Vector 2D carving software. Cool. Not a bad looking bass. Here's a little CNC trick for you. I screwed this piece of wood down, and you can see it just bows up a little bit in the middle. This is for a guitar fingerboard. Normally when I do this, I use 2-sided masking tape and CA glue to make sure it's really flat, but I had some excess wood, so I thought I'd just screw it down and not waste those materials. But I don't want it bowed up like that. I don't want it to be moving around, so I want to give a little bit of pressure here. I could probably drill a hole and put a screw right in there and be safe, but I'm not sure if I have enough room to spare. So instead what I'm doing is using a little piece of scrap wood and a sheetrock screw. using closet door, of course, and I'm just putting a tiny bit of that. So now if it does get hit by a cutter, I won't wreck my cutter, and I've got pressure going down here, and it looks like I don't even need any more on this side, but I'm going to put a piece anyways in case one of them gets cut. It's another use for closet doors. This hold down method works really well. You could even just use just these sometimes and do quick clamps like that on your CNC bed. Now for the maple, I used some maple that I milled down myself from some local stuff, and the board needs to be about 3 inches by 28 inches by about 0.35 inches thick. And I did these sort of rectangular inlays on the file that I left for you, and I should have used a slightly smaller end mill to cut it because the last one got a little small. And then I wanted to fill those in with epoxy, so I just cured it with a little bit of shellac first to keep the epoxy from running into the grain. And now I'm going to let that sit and cure overnight before actually cutting out the rest of the fingerboard. One of the reasons I always like to make these things before I just put the plans out is to make sure they're all perfect, and I can see right here that the truss rod slot that I created is just a little bit too long, so the files that you'll be able to download, that'll be edited. I call this graphite, but it's actually carbon fiber. It looks like I just cut that just a little bit too short, but that'll be fine. I'm going to put a little dab of epoxy in there to hold that still, and then on the end of my truss rod here, I'm going to glue in a little block, and I'm going to put a little bit of epoxy down here to hold that still. But I don't feel the need to get carried away with it. And that time I went a little too long. It's okay, we'll jam those corners in there. That looks good. Nice. Now that my epoxy has cured, I can go back and actually cut in the radius of the fingerboard. I did a 12-inch radius, and I created this again by using one of these molding tool paths instead of 3D modeling. And I just took a section of a 24-inch circle to emulate that radius, and I made it wider than the profile of the fingerboard. Cut that circle out of this piece of wood, and then added my frets and cut the fingerboard out. Now the frets I couldn't cut. Normally I would follow the model, and so the fret slot would actually curve up and down a little bit, but what I had to do is just cut these straight lines, and so they're a little bit deeper in the middle than they are on the edges, but it all worked out fine for me pushing these frets in, so with very little cleanup, which you have to do anyways. And there's your fingerboard. It came out pretty good. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of sanding to do. A quick little recap about this kit. When I designed this new one, it's all designed in an old version of Vectric V-Carve, about 9.5 version. So if you're out to date on your Vectric software, you'll still be able to open it. So I tried to make it as accessible to everybody, so you don't have to have the latest and greatest version of the software. Although as an avid user of Vectric software, I highly recommend getting up to date with it because it's so much better than the older stuff. But regardless, and I did the same thing with the guitar kit. Originally I made it was using the latest version of Aspire, but I also created a version that you can open with a Vectric V-Carve 9.5 or anything newer. So you can go check all that out at newperspectivesmusic.com. The other thing that you'll find with the base kit is I give a list of parts with some links to some eBay links and stuff. And I just want to point out that I'm not necessarily saying these are the parts you should buy. I'm just using them as reference. What I did is I basically just looked for the least expensive thing I could find on eBay and gave you a link. They're not affiliate links. I'm not profiting off of that at all. I just wanted to get you started into some of the things that you might need to buy. Speaking of that, the kit comes with 2 different profiles for pickups. One is for an EMG active soap bar pickup, or pretty much any brand, and those usually go for about $110 to $150, and they have all the electronics you need. Or the other hole is for my custom hand wound single coil pickups, which by the time you add all the electronics parts that you need to buy, the little volume and tone knobs and stuff, it ends up to be about the same price, maybe a little bit less. So that's just a personal preference for you. But then the other thing I did is I put truss rods available in my store at newperspectivesmusic.com, both for the guitar kit and for this bass kit, because I found sometimes it was difficult and very expensive to buy these truss rods individually, and since I buy them in bulk, I just went and I bought a few extra, and I have them listed for like $1 markup over what I paid for them over at my site to help save you some money. So okay, let's jump in. Now we're moving on to doing this by hand, which I haven't done in a long time. And so here I'm marking up my fingerboard, and I'm using the fingerboard router template that comes with the kit. And I first tried this spray paint trick, but it didn't work good enough to give me the lines. It wasn't accurate enough, so I went and kind of cleaned that all up. And then I found the center of my board again, and I aligned my fingerboard with the center and went around and traced it and made all the marks of all the frets with a razor blade of where I need to cut. So I used two-sided tape to stick this on, and I kind of made a mistake here. I went and I cut the fingerboard out first because I didn't want to peel it up and then stick it down again. I was like, well, I'll just do this while I'm at it. Started by rough cutting it on my bandsaw and then finished on my router table with a pattern router bit. And that all worked, relatively easily, of course. But the reason I wish I did it in a different order is, well, I'll explain it here. I also just realized that I made a mistake on this fingerboard that I used to make all the time before the CNC router. That just makes it a little bit harder for me to work. And I was doing it because I didn't want to glue and remove this thing twice. But if I left this board straight, left it square, it would have been easier to cut my fret lines in first, because I could have used something like a T-square up against the edge and then I could cut the straight line. But now that I tapered the edges, I don't have that straight edge to work off of. So what that means I need to do is I need to carefully cut these lines, and I have to set up a guide a little bit. It's just more complicated without having that straight 90-degree edge to work off of. So that's my bad. I should have remembered that. I was so excited to use the template and use it the way it was. I didn't want to remove it and put it back on. So you might want to do that. You might want to glue this down, or tape this down rather, trace it, score your fret marks, take this off, use your straight edge on your rectangular piece of wood and cut all your saw marks, cut all your fret slots, and then put this back on again and do it around. But doing it this way, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to take me an extra second or two to set up and cut these slots. I experimented with a couple different ways to make sure I was cutting these lines straight, and the easiest way ended up just being to use just a straight edge and visually put it up against the marks that I'd already made, and then just very carefully go in with the saw and do it. Initially I was trying to create some templates or jigs or something, and it just wasn't worth it. But if the board were straight, or at least one edge of it were still straight, it would have been a lot easier. Then I found the center. I don't know why I made those pencil marks for. It's just a waste of time, because I just found the center of each fret location to make a dot. And now you could use the template that comes with the kit to create those larger inlays, but I didn't want to spend the time on hand chiseling all those out, so I just made circles because I could drill them quickly and easily, and they're just as effective and look just as good. I didn't even bother making smaller circles on the higher frets where they get skinnier. I just picked a size that fit in all of them and made them consistent. Now, because this wasn't cut on the CNC, it's still just a flat board, so that means there's a lot more sanding to do than the one that was on the CNC. And here I'm using my square radius gauge that's available at squaretools.com to check and make sure I'm sanding in an even radius. And you can see it's not quite there yet. Got a little more sanding to do. You can see here, this is the one I did on the CNC, and this is the one I just did by hand, and I'm just sort of looking at it and seeing that everything looks pretty good. The one difference now when I did it by hand is on the CNC I was able to easily cut this 1/8 inch slot for my nut, and then here's my slot for my 0 fret. And on the one I cut by hand, this is my slot for my 0 fret, but this is a little bit more challenging for me to do. So what I'm going to do instead is just chisel away. I don't even have a chisel small enough to fit in there. I'm just going to chisel away a little bit back here and just put the nut instead of in a slot. Just put one right there. I like to get some finish on these before installing the frets. It just makes it easier to polish it up at the end. Now let's go to the neck. Here's a little trick you might not know about the center square. If you have one, if you don't, I highly recommend getting one of these, not just because I make and sell them, but because they're friggin' awesome and I use mine all the time. So I want to find the center of this board to lay out my neck, but check it out. The board is wider than my center square goes, right? Oh, well, I have this handle has a 0.2, so now I can measure things up to 12 inches to find the center. However, so if I squeeze these brass pins on here, you see, I can actually mess up because I could rack it, right? So if we rack it like that, we're going to get the wrong reading and not have the center. How do we avoid that? We go down to the end of the board and we use those 2 brass pins that are into the tips here, and then squeeze, and now we're all perpendicular, provided your board is perpendicular, and I can mark my center. I can do that on both ends, and now I can find the center of my board without having to measure and all that stuff. SquareTools.com. As discussed last week, I am making this a lefty, so I just flipped the template upside down and centered it all on the board using my center square, traced it all out, and figured out my plan. Now, this template did change a little bit. on the versions that are in your kit. Here you can see I don't have the truss rod slot on that template, so I had to go and create this whole complicated jig to, you know, square it all up and get my truss rod down the center and then put the thing blah blah blah. On the version that's included in the kit now, that truss rod slot is actually included in the neck, so you can just, you know, double-sided tape the neck down onto your block and just cut that without doing all this extra work. And again, these are the reasons why I like to build these and see how they can be improved upon. You also have to make a little bit of extra space up at the top for the truss rod, you know, the adjustment part, which that template now includes, so you don't have to worry about any of that. But now that I've gone and cut this truss rod, I have to carefully recenter it and then go and rough cut out, you know, the material before taking it over to the router table. And again, this is that same box store maple. And on this one, I thought I'd see if it was necessary to put the carbon fiber reinforcements in it, and it turned out it really wasn't. But now, watch this. This is one of these things that happens when you use tools that aren't CNCs. Well, that's frustrating, but again, I'm kind of glad it happened on this build, because, you know, anything can happen in woodworking. What just happened here is this wood just chipped, just clean like that. And so now I have to come up with a solution for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish cutting this out here, and then I'm going to cut that clean and glue another piece of wood on, and then I'll have to put the template back on and just clean that edge up again, which will be, I don't know, maybe kind of a cool look. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep doing this in case this happens anymore on this piece of wood. To quote Bob Ross, this really, in my opinion, turned out to be a happy little accident, because I love the result that I came up with. That just never would have occurred to me if the accident didn't happen in the first place. I try to look at things like this as opportunities instead of setbacks. It helps keep me from getting mad. I can't stress this enough. I highly, highly recommend, if you buy templates from me, to use my templates to make your own templates and then put my templates safely away, because when you're peeling them off like this, it is real easy to break them or split them, or to have the router slip and chip them, and then you'll be out of luck. You'll have to buy a new template. But if you just never use my templates for anything but to create templates for yourself, you'll always have them and you won't have to buy them again. So here you can see I used my hand plane, and I just made that edge square, and I glued in the strip of a little bit of skateboard laminate that I had left over from some previous builds that I got from my friend Ben over at Wobie Design. And then that piece of maple is a piece of cutoff from the neck that we've already, you know, kind of cut off the edge. And I just glued all that on. And once the glue cured, I went back in with my template and cut it all to shape. I think the end result is a really nice touch, and it's the kind of thing that would be difficult to actually plan properly on the CNC router. It's the kind of thing that really doing it by hand is actually easier. So, you know, it was a little note that I put in my back pocket for future builds. Now, I don't have a drill bit that's exactly the same size as the hole I needed for my tuners, so that's why I'm using my router to do this. And it's a little time consuming because you want to do it, then turn the router off and make sure it spins down completely before moving to the next one and carefully turning it on. But, you know, it works fine. Now on the CNC files, I reduced the height of the head of the instrument about 1/10 of an inch, just so the wood would be a little less thick and it would make it better for the tuners to go in, and it would also look better. So I wanted to do the same on the one I'm making by hand, and my first thought was to just get the hand planer and do it. Then I was thinking about setting up some kind of router template, and then I thought, well, why don't I just take my jointer, set up a stop, and I think I did it in 2 passes. I just created this perfect little finished look on my headstock. It actually looks better than it does coming off the CNC. Yep, I missed. I forgot that I added the kit to it. I was going to put just this generic logo, and then I put that underneath, and I kind of forgot and didn't plan for it. So on the lefties one, I'm not going to put that. I'm just going to make it just the generic logo. That was a pretty dumb mistake I made, putting the logo in the headstocks, but I just shaped the headstock out to get rid of that mistake. There's no rule that says it has to be flat there. Do the rest of it in by hand. And then I'm going to just fill in these logos with a little bit of 5-minute epoxy, because I do cut them a little bit deep, and that just gives them a nice look. So And then normally when I'm doing this clamping, I use these band clamps that I get from a guitar supplier, and as well as some other clamps, because they can kind of contour to the shape of the carved neck. But in this case, we got this big flat square, so that's going to make it a lot easier to just use regular woodworking clamps to clamp this all down together nice and tight. And we don't have to worry about squeeze out really that much, because we're going to be cleaning it all up still. So we'll do that for here. And if you're in the CNC stage and you don't have those band clamps, you can use giant rubber bands. Some people use like bike inner tubes and stuff like that, because they can kind of wrap it around. Or you can just be clever and creative with clamps and little pieces of scrap wood on the back of your neck to get a nice square fit. So in the interest of demonstrating different ways to do this instrument building, I'm gluing the fingerboard on one and not on the other, and we'll leave it here until next week. That feels like a good place to stop. Next week we'll do some more of the fret work and the finishing the neck and the final shaping and all that stuff. And you know, like I mentioned at the top, you know, making necks is a little bit challenging and hard, and I was kind of relearning some of the things by hand, some of the techniques that I haven't used in many years because I'm fortunate enough to have this CNC router. And you know, that's par for the course, and it's part of the joy of making things right, is all those learning opportunities and all the mistakes and figuring out how to solve them. And sometimes they turn into really beautiful solutions, like, well, you know, I'm digging it so far. But so come back next week and we'll go a little bit further into doing the neck and stuff, and I'll probably make a bunch more mistakes. And we're getting close. I hope you're playing along. All right, be good.